This material is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends collection. There is no original date given for this interview. The interview was conducted by Mr. Pendleton Woods. The interviewee is Mr. Bernard Kellner. The location of this interview is unknown. This interview is being re-recorded on October the 21st, 1985 for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Michener. There is no introduction on the master tape for this interview. The recording begins after Mr. Woods has already given his introduction of the interviewee.
And who your parents were.
On a farm 2 miles from Madison, Nebraska, Madison County.
Tell about your parents. You'll be talking more than I will. I'll only interject a minute.
My father, Max Kellner, and my mother, Henrietta Altschuler Kellner. Max Kellner was born in Hungary. Came here in childhood. Mother was born in Louisville, Kentucky. My grandparents homesteaded or purchased farmland near Madison, where I was born. And Father came to Oklahoma because he could get a farm for $14, and he'd have to pay $35 an acre for land in Nebraska. Came here this summer that happened to be a real good one, and the watermelons were dragging the vines around even on the highway. He had the misfortune to be filed upon land that a man had vacated, so-called, in South Dewey County. The man came back and said he was poor and had to go and make a living, so my father released it to him and went north, 20 miles, northwest, 20 miles of Tologa, where he homesteaded on the east branch of a Wagon Creek. In other words, just a big, deep canyon with some springs, where we grew to manhood. May I say he came here in 98. They was a family of 10, and the hardships were severe. Our hardships were not as severe as many others because my father had been a thrifty farmer, and he came here with good horses. He brought 2 carloads of equipment and horses and mules and equipment, and he had some money, and in a couple of years he built a reasonably, at that time, the best house in the community. But we were required to work, and we worked from daylight till dark, and 7 days a week many times. All children had to work. I don't know whether I said so or not. There was 10 children. The elder 2 were deaf mutes and had to be sent away to school, so they were only of some help when they home. I happened to be the third, or might say the eldest, where it came to help. We began working as soon as we could walk practically. I remember that I drove team at 8 years old, and the rule was that if you could do a man's work, you got a man's wages. I suspect that as I remember, in Nebraska, my father paid $19 a month in board and room for a hand. In Oklahoma, probably less. $1 a day from sunup till sundown was the going wage. And during this August heat spell we've had, I remember well more and think more of Dewey County than I have at any time in many years. I remember the awfulness of of working in broom corn fields, broom corn 7 feet tall, and the row a half mile long. You would get in there, and if you could keep up to the men, you got $1 a day. My father used to reach over and pull ahead once in a while, but I can remember the awful headaches I had. It is surprising that I didn't succumb to this heat. At that time, I probably was 10 years old. We struggled. My parents were very interested in school, and schools were usually about 3 months. Compared to today's quarters and facilities for children, and the teachers, you might say, there's no comparison. I went to school, in other words, I went to school in dugouts, but eventually our district, Pioneer District number 55, built a schoolroom, just shiplap, and just a wall without any lining. I think after a few years they did get some ceiling inside. Insulation was not well understood. They had a box stove that they burned wood in, and we lived about a mile from this school. Some children lived 3 or 4 miles, and they walked. And I can remember seeing a brother of mine's nose white, frostbitten, as we reached school. Children were glad to go to school and to get away from something to do and something to see. But they always had to do the chores for the winter and do the chores afterwards. I remember an instance in my school life in which we happened to live in non-cotton growing area, and the district to the south of us in cotton growing area. So the cotton growing people would put off their school until after cotton was picking, which made it their 3 months come in after our 3 months was up. Interested in getting school, our parents let us go there, 6 miles away, but we had to get up in the morning and herd the cows in the stock field, so they could get grazed, and come home at night and do that. But we seemed to enjoy it and didn't kick on it. And then from there on, the parents, while they encouraged us, could help us very little, and we dug out what we could for ourselves. And most part of my family got even as high as master's degrees. The teacher, when I was 10 years old, in 1902, still lives in Biocci, Oklahoma. Her name is Mrs. Roy Marford, her given name, Arlie. I thought she was an old woman, but she happened to have been 16. I was 10.
Tell us, could you describe the Dugout School?
Well, the Dugout School was in a bank. In fact, we lived in a bank. We first went to south of Tologa there. The mother didn't know how to handle the floors. They were all scalloped out, dirt floors, and somebody come along and told her to sprinkle it. So you could get some of the dirt out of it, sweep it. And the front of this was logged up. Now the school was probably the same way, I don't remember. And I remember we had some kind of benches made. But in our schools in the north, the Pioneer District, we had double benches. And I remember an instance in which you talk about people complaining about spending money. Somehow or other, they'd always put my father on the school board. And one year, they decided that they should have a library of some kind. So they bought 3 or 4 volumes of I suppose what the forerunner of an encyclopedia. cost $19, and the, the the citizens in the community like to tore their hair out there. Most of them were from illiterate families and weren't too interested, after all, in their children getting an education. You could live somehow without an education in those days. Probably 90% of the people were illiterate. And I remember this buying these books, and they wanted the school board to be punished for having expended that much money. But to me, as I look back, it was a great godsend, because the first we'd get privileged. If we happened to do something good, we got privileged to get one of those books and look at it. And there's where I learned got knowledge of the Polynesians, as I remembered, and the various, that there were many different kinds of races of people throughout the country. You learned about the earth in general and many things that assistance. One of the things that happened, I had an uncle that was pretty well to do in New York, and he came through there to quail hunt. And he purchased for us 5-year subscription to National Geographic. I think that was one of the greatest things that he could have possibly done. It was greater than money, because we read it avidly. Another thing is, we lived there before they had rural mail delivery. Mail delivery. They, of course, like everything they do in Congress, they argue back and forth that it was too expensive and one thing or another. But it was finally decided upon the basis of education, of getting, and the cost of pamphlets and one thing, they were lowered so that these would be distributed, because they were educational. We used to get these magazines or these catalogs, and we learned about advancements, improvements, and they were great education besides being toilet paper. It depended a lot on the family. Long hair, give you an instance, long hair and odd clothing is not a new thing. You could run around over the hills and not bother anybody. And they had their Halloween days. They try to have them every day here now. Today we have Halloweens, and they put dynamite with it. Then they just threw rocks or tore things down, or put on that one night they put the neighbor's carriage upon his roof. But going back to this one instance, I think about a widower who had 3 boys, and they were all in the early teens or late teens. And I remember they got bushy hair. They kind of I can't describe it because I don't know, kind of a pompadour sort of thing. And in those days, the only people that parted their hair in the middle were women. So these boys with this bushy hair, they parted their hair in the middle. That was the forerunner of your hippie business. They also wore odd clothes. They also had boots or shoes made up that were Cuban heels, I presume. But anyway, they were laced up to the top and halfway between the ankle and the knee. It looked like women's shoes. So, and many of these things that have in less aggravated form than they have now, because people couldn't run around and like they can now. But nevertheless, someone said that there was nothing new under the sun, only aggravated situations.
Where did you go to school beyond that?
I, at about 13, I had an accident in the field in which I had an eye damage, and because of that, I got a cataract and was sent to Omaha, Nebraska, to Dr. Gifford, where my people really lived. My grandmother lived, and I could stay there, and had this cataract moved. And while I was there, I went to school there a couple of years, and I was supposed to be in the 8th grade. Down there they put me in the 5th. Somehow or other I was able to manage to stay up in the 5th grade. Then we went to, my father decided that, this was before the Okie days, and we had some friends that had left and gone out to California, a place they call Corning, about 85 miles north of Sacramento, up the Sacramento River, across the river to the west of Leland Stanford Ranch, a beautiful ranch of grapes, and the backers of the Leland Stanford college. There, my dad went out there. He was led to believe that he could make a living on 5 acres, but this was a mistake, and it wasn't possible to make it on more than that. The people had been suckered into buying this land, and there was grapes growing wild. The Tokay grapes now that are 50 or more cents a pound. You go out and help yourself. We live, and these 5-acre tracts were outlined with fig trees and olives and what have you. You just could help yourself. We lived on a 10-acre tract of almonds. A great big house and well water and everything. $10 a month paid rent. But the thing that drove us out of Northern Cal was the malaria. We got malaria and we couldn't, and we came back. Dad decided it was not for him, or our family decided, and they came back to the Oklahoma farm and started over.
What year was that?
That was 1910. And
where were you? Where did you go back to
Dewey County?
Could you describe Dewey County at that time, changes that might have taken place during that period of time?
Well, the changes from, say, 98 to then, there were some changes. There were better business communities. For instance, our post office in Sparta was 2 miles north of us on the highway. They had consolidated the postal service through the rural delivery, and many post offices had been discontinued. These post offices usually had a little country store and freighted their merchandise in from Woodward or Moreland or some other town that they might go to, and usually a farmer that ran the store and the post office.
Can you think that during this period, these early 1900 and 1910, of any incidents of interest that happened in Dewey County or in the area where you live, those things that were particularly unusual or newsworthy?
It was pretty staid during that time. The first real change came about with a railroad, the advent of it wasn't the Katy, I forget what they called it. There was a Northwestern term in there. But Katy finally bought the railroad. This railroad, they're trying to get the Corporation Commission or the Commerce Chamber, the Federal Department of Commerce to discontinue at this time was built. That made a marked change on the country, and a town, an example is that a town called Cestus was a going live town, even to the point of supporting a baseball team. Thrifty town. At this time, when this railroad came in, why, they just had nothing to do but, if they could get away from this Cestus, they moved their business all to Lightside. Today, there's only maybe a filling station or a police station on this Highway 33, I think it's called. there's a major change, and of course, one of the major change was that people, for example, before this, there was a great inducement for people to go to Canada, to homestead in Canada. The Canadian government was begging for Americans to come up there, and they'd begin to go there and vacate their homesteads. Many of them. This is one of the things that happened. You didn't get your patent or your right, your deed to your land, unless you stayed under certain regulations, one thing or another, for 5 years. And at that time, you got your patent. But many of those people had already mortgaged. They got around the law. They fixed a mortgage. They gave a mortgage to mortgage companies, which is no different than now. And then, of course, don't have homesteads. But they'd give a mortgage for $300 or $400 to buy some groceries, or thought they wanted another wagon or a plow or something else, or a team of horses. But they never got around to repaying these loans. And so, when as soon as they got a patent, this mortgage company had put their mortgage on record, and if the homesteader didn't pay up, he just lost it. He just surrendered his place. That's all there was to it, or got it taken away from him. And I remember an instance in which party had the money to pay, and he, in early life of this community, that was before the federal guarantee law for banks, in which he went to the banker and said, "I've got the money, but they won't give me a discount. They make me pay all the interest that was due, would be due, and when the end of the loan period was up." So the banker told him to put it in the bank and draw interest on it till that time and then pay it. Well, the bank immediately went broke shortly thereafter, and the fellow lost his homestead and the money too. Going back about this terribleness of this heat and one thing or other, they would have. I remember one time that we farmed out there, and we had 16 head of horses, and had a lot of horses, a lot of money and equipment, and 3 of us, we were youngsters, my father, we farmed all year, and we made $85 out of our crop. Mother was thrifty, of course, and sold milk and eggs, and I think maybe she got 6 cents a dozen for eggs, I don't know, sometimes, and whatever, cream and whatever have. Somehow she managed to garner together $700, and out of this $700, because you didn't have a system in which you declared a national emergency whenever crops failed or you had a drought, as we have this year out there. You lived or died. You lived on jackrabbits for meat, and scrounged around to get a little cornmeal and one thing and another. And then one of the things that the farmer always did, you could dig a cave, and it so happened that our ground was a good ground, being a loam. You could dig a cave, and if you kept it well covered and drained and well shedded water off it, it would last for years and years and years. Well, you could build, and the temperature stayed in there at one normal year round, and you'd put shelves up there, and the mother, and stop here to mention, we didn't have any fruit trees to go there. Dad got a orchard started soon. In a few years we had orchard, but to start with, we kids, it was a lark for us. We go out through the brush and over the canyons and gather plums and wild grapes, wild plums, wild currants, and what have you, and Mother had canned those. And I remember, to start with, we didn't have, in the first year, we didn't have anything, so Mother planted tomatoes and, I can't think of the term these. They were sort of a fruit plant, but still they were a tomato type there. And they made from tomatoes, herbs, and ketchup, and cabbage, and one thing and another. My family being a little thrifty and one thing and another, and a big family. Dad would go to Woodward in the fall, and they'd ship carloads of cabbage there, and you could go to the buy it right off the freighter or the freight car for maybe a half cent a pound, and Mother'd put this cabbage up in the form of sauerkraut and other valuables, and Dad'd always buy 500 sacks of potatoes or whatever it was that was necessary to run us till spring. And this cellar, we called it, acted as a storm cave too. And that way we had the thrifty people really, they had to look ahead. They couldn't wait till something happened. Today they let things go, and if something happens, they run to Washington, D.C. or the welfare department or something else. And this is maybe made a better people out of us. I don't know. At least we thrived and we existed, and my parents, when they passed away, still living on the farm there. They lived in spite of the hardships. My father was 90 years old when he passed away.
Why don't you tell us a little about the Oklahoma Infantry, your first
Okay.
entry into it?
I didn't know much about it. I don't recollect much about the infantry until World War I came on. I had finally got to be a teacher and taught school in country schools. When the war was declared, I was in Ellis County teaching a community in a community called Mount Zion district. I had kids from babyhood to 21 years old, of all the grades and everything else, 70 of them. Well, anyway, I finished up that year. I had 7 months school to teach that year. I got the big sum of $70 a month. I began teaching, I got 40. Anyway, I was at the Northwestern State Normal School at the time. At the time the war was declared, I was still a teaching, but I went from there to Northwestern State Normal School. And, of course, everything was, in the community and everywhere, was excitement about the war, its natural outcome. And contrary to what we see today, everybody was interested in what part they should play in the war. And the young men, they were like me, they didn't know much about anything in the military, only that they had read history. Our histories in those days took this attitude that we say, if you want to know about a country or about an army or anything else, read the biographies of the great men. Well, these men were held up in the Civil War, and like George Washington, Jefferson, and all those. These are the people we studied and what they did, and the patriots of the Revolutionary War and patriots of the Civil War, and even we were General Lee. People like General Lee was held up as great people, though we were taught to disagree with them. And so there wasn't anybody but what talked favorable or backing the government. As I don't recall any, at that moment, I don't recall any, at least in our part of the country, in the northwest part of Oklahoma. The people there, now this is contrary to what we have today, we find the educated people are the real resistors in those days, the educated, those who were more educated, were not the resistors. And a little later on, I'll tell about an instance of revolt. Well, anyway, they're talking, and so we were all talking. Everybody's running off the Navy, seemingly to me, was joining the Navy, my friends and everybody. I didn't believe that due to my eye, I didn't believe I could get into the Navy, so I thought I'd go the Army way. And so 5 of us, leading up to that, I remember well that the president of the college, a man by the name of Graves, called a meeting and urged us to wait for the draft. The draft had not been passed. They hadn't instituted a draft law in Congress. They were talking about it. And he urged us to stay and go to school, that the government would select those that they wanted to go, and that it was just as patriotic not to wait. It was to up and go, and it'd be better for everybody concerned. But that didn't deter many of the young men around the college. And I remember that 5 of us, one of them was Senator Denton. Been passed. They hadn't instituted a draft law in Congress. They were talking about it. And he urged us to stay and go to school, that the government would select those that they wanted to go, and that it was just as patriotic not to wait. It was to up and go, and it'd be better for everybody concerned. But that didn't deter many of the young men around the college. And I remember that 5 of us, one of them was Senator Denzel Garrison's uncle, and Don Garrison's brother. He and a fellow by the name of Ralph Beagle and Lawrence Thomas, and another man that I can't recall at this moment. Finally, I never did see him after the war. He went to Detroit and was swallowed up there. We talked to, in our town, was a captain of one of the first machine gun companies, at least in the National Guard, of the 1st Oklahoma Infantry, a gentleman by the name of Gus Hadwiger. He'd been county attorney and he lived there. He was a German, well, in fact, he was born in Germany. And some thought he resigned his commission because he didn't want to fight against the Germans. Whether this is true or not, I don't know. I rather think he was over the age limit anyway. We went and talked to him, and he urged us to join the 1st Oklahoma Infantry, particularly the machine gun company, which he had commanded. In other words, he was a kind of a recruiter for the 1st Oklahoma Infantry. He said we would be with friends and people from home, and it'd be nicer to serve in the war together. So on about sometime between the 25th and the 1st, we took off. I don't know who paid our transportation or how we got there, but we took off for Fort Sill. The 1st Oklahoma Infantry had been recalled after having been at down on the border. They were recalled about 30 days after they returned from down there, and were stationed and in training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So we took off, and I presume we rode the Rock Island to El Reno, and then the Rock Island, and then continued our journey, presumably on the Rock Island, down to Fort Sill. It was probably 11 o'clock when we arrived at Fort Sill and got off. And as we marched across the ravine there, boardwalk, I noticed two fellows shooting craps. One of these gentlemen, I don't know whether I'll give his name, he lives here. His name is Kellerman, and Glenn Kellerman. He lives northeast of where I live. And he later joined the company that I was in. Well, as we marched across we went up through, and I don't recall, I think we walked all the way from the station through the old post, across the Medicine Creek, or a branch thereof, over to the new post. Walked across the drill ground, questioning people, and trying to find out where this machine gun company was located. Well, as I well remember, everybody did their own recruiting. They was out getting men for their own company in those days. And we were told by the infantryman, you don't want to belong to the machine gun company. It's a suicide outfit. The average life of a machine gunner was 7 minutes. I presume up in front they were talking about. That didn't deter us. We never thought about it. No one ever thought about getting killed or what was going to happen to them, or whether they was going to get a bonus, or whether they was going to get education, or whether they was going to be this or that or the other thing. We did know something about pensions. I knew about it because a neighbor in our section of land was a pensioner, a Union soldier, and if I remember right, he's getting $50 every 3 months, or maybe it was $50 every month. I don't know, but he was a multimillionaire to us, and we envied him the money he got. But anyway, no one ever thought about what they was going to get out of it, or what they was going to do. And they went. And after we found our company headquarters, we were asked, did we had dinner? We had not. So we sent to the kitchen, or to the kitchen. You're still running it?
Yes, it's right.
So we were given lunch. What is left? The mess sergeant and the KPs. But the incident that has always stuck with me, that it was funny. It's funny now. It wasn't then. When we were all through, we five got up and just left our plate and knives and forks and cups right where we left them. Started walking out. I don't know whether the sergeant or who it was, but he yelled at us and said, "Hey there, you have to wash your own dishes. Pick up your stuff and take you in." And I remember what Ralph Beagle, one of the men that went with us, volunteered from Alva, said, "I didn't come in here to wash dishes." In other words, he was going to refuse to do it, but they explained the facts of life to him right quick, and we washed our dishes. Well, it must have been the weekend, Friday or something, that we started our examinations. One, Lawrence Thomas of Gage, had played football, and I guess he had fractured a rib. And we all got sworn in. He didn't. As he went to sign his name, he grabbed his rib and they noticed it, and the doctor stopped him. One thing that had held him up was the fact that he was under 18 and his parents was objecting him joining. And by the time he got this authority to join, the next week, as he sat down, as I said a bit ago, he grabbed himself and the doctor noted it, and they wouldn't take him. Well, I said we probably got down to Sill in April. By the time we were processed, we were those of us that were accepted were sworn in on the 2nd of May. Well, naturally, we assigned this company, machine gun company. As I understand it, this machine gun companies came into being on the border, and the cavalry and the units, regiments, and the infantry regiments were given one company each machine gun. Most of them, and I was told, or understood, that ours was the first motorized machine gun company in the United States Army. We had, the strength was 72 enlisted men and 4 officers. Our motors, our power units was T-model Ford trucks, pickup trucks. And they were always out of order or couldn't get too much speed out of them. Machine guns was a misnomer. What we really had was an automatic rifle, a Lewis automatic rifle, which we trained with. Then the draft, a general draft of seemingly, technically, they could not create a national army with the existing guardsmen as they existed. So sometime after the draft for individuals, citizens, they passed a draft which transferred the National Guard into the National Army. And as I remember, the regular Army units was divisions, were numbered up to 25, from 25 to 50 or beyond that maybe was National Guard divisions, ex-National Guard divisions, and from there on was National Army. Well, it passed this law, but they couldn't just transfer the individuals into another unit without his consent. They could discharge him. He didn't have to sign up, but he was required to accept a transfer and had to sign up to accept it. Of course, he had the choice of going back home and being drafted if he wanted to. And as far as I know, every one of our people signed up for to accept an assignment in what you might call the National Army. Our unit on about the 5th of September, after training strenuously all over Fort Sill, was transferred to Camp Bowie, or Fort Worth, Texas, where the 36th Division was being formed, composed of Oklahoma and Texas units. An interest that's always stuck in mind, I was detailed to help get the units loaded in trucks. We had trucks. We began to have trucks. But these trucks had the power shaft was uncovered, and the one I had to deal with got in the hauling stuff off the trash pile and dump, got mixed up in baling wire. As you must know, we had horses and everything in it. And I was late last to get on the train, just did catch it. Well, on our way down, we went through Lawton, and every town we went through, the people loaded us, brought crates of oranges and everything you could think of to us. Well, we got down to Fort Worth, the regiment was established. Then they began to reform the 36th Division. 36th Division was a square unit, and they had each infantry was given uh, instead of having a company of machine guns in each company, in each regiment, they had their infantry regiment plus a battalion of machine guns. My machine gun company was was what do you say? Surplus. Surplus. And as many of being that the Texans were in the saddle and were politically stronger and everything than the Oklahomans. The Oklahomans, they took our men, most of them, into the 142nd Infantry, and it left my company loose. So they formed what they called the headquarters company, division headquarters battalion, which is composed of 4 units, and increased the personnel from 172 to 172. I rather think they increased the officers, but I don't recall exactly.
What was your rank at that time?
Going back on rank, when I joined the 1st Oklahoma Infantry in the machine gun company, we had an old-time cavalryman who had been a sergeant, was captain, had taken over from Hadwiger. And I rather think they were, in peacetime, they had given examinations, written examinations and other examinations before he got a promotion. So sometime in the first month, they gave us examinations and promoted. I don't know what the basis, other than what you passed, you got. But I made corporal within 30 days. In July of that year, I was made a sergeant. So I was with, when I got to Fort Worth, I was a sergeant. Well, sometimes we were horse-drawn and sometimes we were motorized. An incident, we got horses, and a year later we were motorized, or maybe not a year later. And when we went to turn the horses in, they'd been giving us mares, and they all had folded, and we had a horses surplus that we'd never received, and how to get them into the government till was a problem. We had colts running out our ears. But at any rate, we filled up this unit. I got 172 men, and they increased all the units. They increased whatever the infantry was, 150 or whatever, they increased it to 250 infantry unit. I'm talking about a company. And so they filled them up with the draft. For in general, the men drafted from Oklahoma were sent to San Antonio. What do they call that?
That's Fourth Army.
Yeah, it's Fourth Army. But what do they call the cantonment there? I can't think of the cantonment. You can look it up. So when we put in our requisition for men, what we got is what the National Army did not want. It so happened that many of these men were excellent men, but we got venereal disease, for an example. We got people who were illiterate, and the older men we got older men. They were much older. And we got 100 of those actually. And I want to stop here and throw in something here that happened, talking about draft dodgers and escapees. There was resistance against the drafting argument, and usually it was the illiterate that give you problems then rather than the educated as they do today. I recall when we were at Fort Sill that my company, my machine gun company, because we were mobile, we had these trucks, was alerted to go to southeast Oklahoma, where they were in revolt against the draft, and they thought we was going to have to go down there and quell it. So we were alerted. It never did come off. I don't know how they settled it or what. Well, going back to Fort Worth, so we trained there, and trained. And I might throw this in for what it's worth. Incident that happened. They thought it'd be wonderful to have an all-Indian company. So they put all the Indians in one company, and they had, I believe it was E Company, in the 142nd Infantry. And I'm not sure, but I know that one of the locks from Adler's was in that. One of the locks was a captain. But one of the officers one day I observed was drilling this company. And apparently the enlisted men, the Indians, didn't care too much about it. They were tired of training year after year and day after day and going nowhere. So they didn't cooperate too well sometimes. And I remember well one day seeing this officer trying to get them as they marched, give them a march. They'd lose step and try to get them to come to order arms. It would sound like a hailstorm, and he could do nothing about it. Stopping there, the 1st Oklahoma Infantry was very, very disappointed that they were split up. They had hoped to go, and they resented being put in with the Texans. They were affiliated in in the regiment of 142nd with the 7th Texas from Amarillo or out in that area, who had no experience at all. That is, individually they may have had, but they came down there with sticks and in civilian clothes. But they got all the rank, the most of it, and they got their men and their people were taken care of, and naturally the Oklahoman felt like they were superior and that they were old timers and that had been imposed upon. Coming along Christmas, most of the Oklahomans, I guess, or a great many of them, went over the hill for Christmas holidays. And when they come back, they all put them in a stockade, but they had so darn many of them that the authorities decided that the best thing was that they'd go back to their companies and become soldiers, and that was the best thing to do. So you always had silent revolts and things that happened, but not in the extremism that we have today. Well, anyway, we went on training, and as I said in the beginning here, that this headquarters machine gun company battalion was 4 companies, A, B, C, and D. A and B were Oklahomans, and 2 companies from one of the regiments, the surplus of the regiments, out of the regiments of the Texas Guard came over. They were A. One was A and one was C. They formulated D Company out of a cadre from the 1st Oklahoma Infantry. They took there Captain McLean, who was the commander of Company M, Oklahoma City. Captain McLean is a gentleman we know as Lieutenant General Raymond McLean of Oklahoma City, now deceased. Came with him sergeants. He picked out sergeants I don't remember all their names. 2 or 3 of them live in Oklahoma City, like Pete Wilson and no name now, but at any rate, that company was formed. Then later they decided to have a motorized machine gun company or battalion, and reduced it to 2 companies, all Oklahomans. So the 131st Machine Gun Battalion became the battalion headquarters battalion machine gun. All over, principally Oklahomans. We had considerable Texans. We had several Texas volunteers in our outfit in the machine gun company I was in. It was B Company, so it stayed B Company, and McLean's company was made D Company. Of course, we had a supply unit, one thing or another, and that's the way we existed there until they went overseas. After I was in a while, decided, my experience had been over at the college, that everybody running off that had some education and getting a commission. To me, it didn't seem plausible that I could become a commissioned officer. Certainly, and I had so little knowledge of what it took to officer war that I thought that they could get all their officers from West Point. Anyway, when I got down to the Fort Sill, I saw what was going on, and in the service I saw that people were going that didn't have any better chance, or didn't seem to me any more capable than I was. So I applied for officers training camp, the third one. But unbeknown to me, and this was a rule, there was a circular letter out that no officer should avoid processing an application. But like today, the officers reneged on that. And they reneged on it. I didn't find it out till the 4th camp come along. And I put in, and the reason for the captain reneging on it, he valued his non-commissioned officers, and he didn't want to lose them. He figured he was going overseas right quick, and that he wanted a good cadre of non-commissioned officers. But at any rate, just a short time before the closing of these applications reaching headquarters, Fuquay, an Oklahoman by the name of Fuquay, now deceased, asked me why. He told me, I thought you were going to apply for officers training camp. I said, I did. Well, he says, never reached headquarters. So he said, come on over, and they went over, and I went, in that, I went over the captain's head, and not meaning to do something like that, and it was 4 of us that did that. Sergeant Dinwiddie, not Dinwiddie, that's not correct. Sergeant Whitty, whose father was the judge at Holdenville, Dean Robinson from Ponca City, and John Bell, who now, Dean is dead. John Bell, I understand, is living in Houston. And Dinwiddie is a wealthy man, real estate man in Fort Worth. And, see, did I give you 4? And I came back here. But we were in, some reason or other, we was in the streets. And we found out, we rushed over there and made an application. And we were admitted, all of us, admitted to college. And we was all commissioned. Well, going back to the first Oklahoma, there was a lot of silly things that happened, problems. Many things. For instance, I happen to belong to an ethnic group that wasn't too well thought of by many others, and it had been taught from the beginning of many centuries that my ancestors had sinned and never should be forgiven. which is contrary to our theory of government. At any rate, being made corporal in 30 days didn't help things out. Because a lot of them had been there for a long time, and they hadn't gotten even to be a first-class private. They didn't make them first-class privates in 3 months or whatever it is now, time, automatically. In those days, you had to get it. And so, resentment existed. And I remember that that one Saturday, just before the July holiday, that I saved up $5 to go on this trip home. But some 30 days before that, or before payday, one of the bugler, a fellow named Renfrew, borrowed that $5. I was soft-hearted enough to let him have it. He said he'd get it back to me, but he didn't give it back. So he took off, went on the trip. I stayed there in camp. Well, a fellow named John Dodson, that was from down Hobart or someplace. Is this all right? Was in my squad, and he was encouraged by some of the others to. And in my squad, he'd cause me trouble. When I'd give a command, he's allowed to step off on the left foot or something else. Well, I didn't complain about it. I figured that I had to win him over somehow, and I'd get scolded for being out of line, or my squad out of line, or something like that. Command. And well, he didn't get to go for some reason or other, and he was on duty in the mess hall. And as I went through, I decided I want a little gravy, I think, and I asked him for some, and he called me a dirty name and told me to get on out. Well, as I got over, went and set my plate down, I decided this had to be brought to a screeching halt. I couldn't go on that way. I wouldn't take that kind of stuff from him. But I didn't want to, somehow, in the back of my mind, I didn't want to turn him in. I wasn't after his hide. I just wanted him to get along with me. So I went back, and the custom then was to tell a man, I'll see you on the picket line, which meant a fight. You'd fight it out. In other words, a form of duel, which was against the regulations. But somehow or other, the customer service is not paying attention if you had a fight over some personal matter, as long as you didn't do a mayhem of some kind. Well, I went back and told him. He said, "You meet me." Well, 6 o'clock came, and no, he didn't move in, come down, or go to the picket line. So I went up and hunted him up and told him, I said, "You heard what I said?" And he said, and I had told him, "You don't need to pay attention to these stripes. These stripes will be off." Of course, hitting an officer or a superior was a violation of regulations, too. Then come down or go to the picket line. So I went up and hunted him up and told him, I said, "You heard what I said?" And he said, and I had told him, "You don't need to pay attention to these stripes. These stripes will be off." Of course, hitting an officer or a superior was a violation of regulations, too. And so at whatever time it was, maybe 7 o'clock, you never saw so many people, regulars and everybody else that came down, surrounded us. Well, this is what happened. I said to him, I said, I'm not interested in fighting you. I'm interested in us getting along. And he said, "We came down here to fight." And I let him have it quick. But he was better than I was, and we fought around there and fought around. And finally he got exhausted or something, tried to kick me, and you should have heard the people around there, the soldiers. They wouldn't allow unfair tactics that way. Well, he said he just slipped, but the next time he took a kick at me, I kicked him back so quick that it made his head swim. But anyway, in a short time, he wanted to quit. Said he had enough. And I said, "Okay, you want to quit? Let's shake on it and go back and go to work." By that time, I had 2 black eyes, because I said he's better with his fists than I was. And so he I said, well, you came down here to fight. You said we did. Let's fight. So he went down. He just laid down. I said, well, shake hands then, or get up and fight, because that's what we came down here for. He said he just couldn't do it. So I thought I was in for it, and I stayed in the back, out of sight. I had two black eyes, and finally I ran into the first lieutenant, which was, by the way, the officers. I'll stop here. The first lieutenant was Thompson, was his name. He was a former schoolman here in high school, and a second lieutenant, now Colonel Moss, Roger Moss, lives here. He's the only living officer of that unit. He gave me my first platoon training. And a second lieutenant by the name of Campbell, Howard Campbell, and a first lieutenant by the name of let's see. At this time, we've had reunions of the 131st Machine Gun Company, being that most of them were from Oklahoma. Every year, practically, we have a reunion this year at Quartz Park, where we have it always, the 3rd and 4th of October, Saturday and Sunday. Quartz Park.
We've just been